Time for the ride home in ENC.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
This is your 5 o'clock drive with Patrick Johnson.
Holy mackerel!
More news, more interviews, more ECU stories than you can shake a stick at. Hey, stop shaking that stick. This is the Patrick Johnson Show
Pirates win! Pirates win!
on 94.3 The Game.
All right, welcome in, everybody. Midweek edition of the PJ Show. Nice to have you with us here. Little hoop shirt because we've got the NBA draft tonight. Philip the Ref Pilkington is alongside. Great P-Man here with you. Cooper Flagg just hours away from being selected. A couple hours, well, 3 hours, 3 hours away for being selected as the first pick in the NBA draft. The Mavs picked up a veteran big yesterday. Meanwhile, the Celtics were busy and even more wheeling and dealing overnight. Porzingis out in Boston. So clearly the C's, you know what they're doing, Pilk? Shedding salary, shedding talent, and if we wind up in the lottery this time next year, so be it, it seems like.
Yeah, I think so. You know, you're going to be lucky to have Jason Tatum back before the All-Star break. You know, with guys like Derek White and Jaylen Brown, you're still probably not going to be a bad basketball team by any means. But at the end of the day, you know, we talked about the Drew thing the other day. I can't remember if we did it on air. You and I were just chit-chatting that, you know, they went for a little more scoring, got rid of some of their defense. So I think Boston is not trying to rebuild from the top, but they're trying to rebuild the role players, rebuild from the middle, shed, like you said, some bigger salaries, some guys that have maybe been injury-prone. And look, next year is not going to be the Boston Celtics year. I think everybody knows that. So prep these guys, get them part of a system, get a bunch of guys to stay healthy. And so when you hope Jason Tatum comes back in full for the 26-27 season, you can be right there back to being a contender.
So going tonight, of course, Cooper Flagg to the Mavs. We will see if it'll be Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey going to San Antonio. Then you have the Sixers. Then you have the Hornets picking fourth. And then you have the Jazz. We probably should have got T-Bone on today, now that I think about it. Oh, well, because he could have told us maybe what Charlotte is thinking. Who knows what Charlotte's thinking?
I don't think Charlotte's ever thunk.
Doesn't seem like it. There was a time, Philip, when, and I'm considerably older than you, but I am old enough to remember there was a time where Duke went to 7 out of 9 Final Fours.
Yeah, there's
and all you heard from UNC fans were, well, the job of the college coach is to get them ready for the NBA because the Tar Heels had all of these people in the NBA. Matt Norlander from CBS. North Carolina has not had a top 5 pick in 20 years.
Wow.
Think about that for a minute.
Yeah, so 20 years. So that was Ty Lawson?
Who right? It was, I don't know, but they've not had a top 5 pick since then. In the last 20 drafts coming into today, so going back to the 04 draft, Duke has had 32 picks in the first round. North Carolina has had 23. Of those 32 picks for Duke, 18, I think is what I counted, have been in the lottery, a dozen for North Carolina in that 20-year span. So Duke averages about a lottery pick a year.
Yeah.
And a pick and a half draft. But not our guy, not the old Tar Heels. But you know what? It's not about it's about all the banners. It's not about putting guys in the league anymore in Chapel Hill. No, it's not about that. It's about the banners because they'll hang about.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not saying I've seen all kinds of things but I mean, talking to some people that I truly respect their opinion, especially that know a thing or two about appropriate roster makeup. The North Carolina roster makeup is not exactly, I mean, is it tournament team? Sure. Possibly should be, right? All the built-in advantages. But they're not a favorite going into April.
No.
To be in the Final Four.
I mean, the last time they made the national championship, I mean, you can't call them a Cinderella, right? When you think of Cinderella, you think of teams that, you know, are usually automatic qualifiers.
Well, it was an unexpected run.
It was an unexpected run.
Right.
Obviously, I don't have any room to talk because of who they beat in the Final Four, but yeah, it is just funny how they move the goalpost. Like you said there, if you go from 89 through 96 or something like that, whatever the span is there of Duke going to 7 Final Fours in 9 years, the goalpost was one thing, now it's another. So we all know their political views in Chapel Hill, so we're not surprised they like to move the goalpost so that it benefits them.
And I can't think of the guy's name, but on WRAL Sports, they did this big segment where the guy who's Coach K's son-in-law that is on ESPN, that broadcast this analyst for ESPN. Anyway, they had him, I guess, break down, or they've had him in their sports segments breaking down, the ACC guys or the Triangle guys going, and he talks about RJ Davis, and the poor guy looked like he was being held captive, being held hostage maybe. But he thinks RJ Davis is maybe an undersized backup point guard. Perhaps he is. Maybe he's a guy that catches on, but I stranger things have happened, I suppose. We've gotten word here and there that R.J. Felton's gone and worked out for certain people. We'll see. I mean, look, I think R.J.'s height is prohibitive, but he's a little taller than I thought he was.
Felton?
I thought 6'2", 6'3". Yeah, he's a little closer to 6'4". R.J.'s athletic enough. Can he score a two-way deal? If not, he'll make a lot of money. He'll make a lot of money overseas, and it'll be tax-free. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No. Patrick, speaking of, if I don't think RJ gets drafted. I think if he does, it's an after draft deal. But if you do get in a situation where you decide to stay up to the end, do you like this splitting it into 2 days? We got round 1 tonight, round 2 tomorrow.
Right.
I think this is good because I don't know the last time I saw the 60th pick in the NBA draft. Because you think the first night of the NFL's long?
Well,
I mean, this stuff goes to 130, 145 sometimes too. I like this splitting it into 2 days thing. I'm more inclined to watch second round tomorrow, especially with the Sox off tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I'd be more inclined, Freudian slip, more inclined to watch the second round tomorrow than I would be. But this is like everything else. It's made for television, but it's smart, and it makes it an event. And, I would almost say in some ways, Pilk, it might even put a little more shine on the second round. It might make it a little more of, because like the late stages of the NFL draft, when the picks are flying, you don't get a lot of time to have, a breakdown and analysis or comments under the old NFL or under the old NBA draft format.
Yeah.
They'd be talking about maybe something that happened if 3 or 4 picks go by. So this might give it a little more time to breathe in a sport that, let's face it, is predicated on stardom. It's the only sport where there's no apparatus of any kind concealing the face of or heads of the athletes. All the other 3 major sports in these United States, you have a helmet or a hat or some kind of face mask or something on your stars. So, I mean, this gives you a chance to maybe get a little further exposure. And I guess there's obviously going to be some foreign kids that'll factor into this as well. Anything that kind of introduces the audience to these players is a good thing because there's a serious lack of star. I mean, when certain folks on the worldwide leader are enthusiastic about a nearly washed Kevin Durant at 37 going to Houston and are trying to convince the audience that Phoenix is the one who got fleeced in the deal. Houston sure mortgaged an awful lot for a guy that's probably going to miss 30 games this year.
Exactly.
And isn't the Durant that won titles in Golden State?
No, nor the one who unfortunately didn't win one in OKC because I really did like those old OKC teams.
Sure, yeah.
But, it's interesting you bring up the point of putting the face out there with the young man. And, when you look at basketball, you mentioned the international, but even think about this new G League Ignite thing. You have so many players drafted from that, and people are not sitting around and watching the G League.
Oh, yeah.
People
True.
know who
Good
Cooper
point.
Flagg is, right? There's no, I mean, look, we're going to interview the young man, but there's not a person watching the NBA draft who's never seen Cooper Flagg, who can't probably pick his voice being blindfolded out of a lineup. But there's 59 other picks to this thing, and there's 59 other players that are going to be going to your favorite NBA team or somebody you're going to have to compete against. And look, like you said, they need some star power in this league right now. There's a lot of B-list stars in the NBA right now, I think.
Well, I think J.J. Redick made the great point when he got drafted. What did they see his role as an NBA guy? Well, he was going to be a role player because the majority of guys in the NBA are role players. Not everybody's a superstar. But this league desperately needs superstars. I will say this. I think they are getting a great opportunity tonight with Cooper Flagg to win back the hearts and minds of perhaps segments of the fan base that are no longer as enthralled by what goes on in the NBA during the course of the season. But now I'll say this, and I think this bodes well for the league. Finals ended up being higher cumulatively in the ratings, for what that's worth, this year than what they were last year, despite the slow start. I think going 7 games certainly, helped that tremendously. And it was an entertaining series.
It wasn't. I think you didn't know who was going to win really until Tyrese, popped his Achilles, right? Whereas I think last year, I mean, it was the Celtics' final to lose. There was no way the Mavericks were going to beat the Celtics. Correct. 4 out of 7. Now, if the Celtics went out there and laid an egg in 2 or 3 games, we're having a different conversation, but everybody expected it. Like, I'm not going to lie. I had the victory cigar sitting next to me last year. I was ready to smoke. I enjoyed it, and I knew I was going to smoke a victory cigar. I mean, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but we knew. This year we didn't know.
So an opportunity with, again, kind of Duke leading the way and Cooper Flagg being the guy that has a chance to maybe capture the imaginations of a fan base. I don't want to say like Caitlin Clark, but I think certainly this is a bit of a seminal deal. And hopefully the Mavericks will handle it correctly. I guess Kyrie Irving has said he will stick around. We're starting to sound like the Blue Devil Planet podcast, but that's all right. That's fine. I mean, we'll see where Con Knippel goes too. I'm kind of interested in. There's a guy who'll probably be a pretty good. Well, look, it's the same thing with Flip. If Flip fell to the second round, everybody, oh, what a bust. You could argue the second part of the season, he was the best rookie in the league.
Yeah.
Certainly for a 2-month stretch, he was. And I think a lot of it is, unlike the college game where the officiating lets the defenders tackle guys trying to move offensively, the NBA, one thing the NBA gets right, freedom of movement. They get that 1,000% right. That's one thing that the NBA and international basketball get totally right.
They do.
And so I think a guy like Knippel, who's not going to, but I think Knippel's a guy who, there's an extreme with it, don't get me wrong. But I mean, a guy that Knippel will be able to take advantage of the spacing of the NBA. Be interesting. We'll see. Pilk, when we are in breaks and all that, do a little research, see what they're saying about the Hornets.
Okay. I'll do that. I can do it during this break right before Brian Murphy, and he just signed on now, so he's ready to go.
Excellent.
So let's get to a break.
So Brian Murphy, WRAL Sports fan and WRAL Sports investigative reporter. Some happenings as it pertains to sports wagering in North Carolina. We're going to talk to him about that and a lot more. So stay with us here on this Wednesday Patrick Johnson Show.
We're back to the show.
I missed you. We all missed you. Did you miss him?
This is the Patrick Johnson Show on 94.3 The Game.
All right, John Gilbert, ECU Director of Athletics tomorrow. Mike Swartz will be with us on Friday, ECU basketball coach. But right now, Brian Murphy from WRAL Sports back on the Patrick Johnson Show as he joins us from the WRAL World Headquarters. It's a buzz in there. There's all kinds of things going on in that news operation. All right, Brian, great to have you on. HB 14, which would allow gamblers to deduct losses from winnings for state tax purposes, which would conform with what is done federally, has passed the Rules Committee in the House. What does that mean, and what is the journey to maybe get this done before the lawmakers leave town?
Yeah, it's still got a long way to go. It obviously has to get through the House. The Senate Leader Phil Berger is opposed to this bill, so I'm not sure that it's going to happen. But it kind of makes sense, right? If you win $1,000 but you lost $1,200, you shouldn't really have to pay taxes on your winnings since they're not really winnings. But under North Carolina law, as it's currently written, you would have to claim that $1,000 and pay taxes on it. They're trying to clean that up. I'd be very interested, and I have not been able to get this data. But, people were paid out over $5.9 billion in winnings last year.
Yeah.
From gambling. Now, they didn't win money because they gambled more than that. But in theory, all $5.9 billion that people won, they're supposed to have claimed on their taxes. I don't have a great way to find out how much of that was claimed on people's taxes. But in theory, it should have been claimed on your taxes if you won anything from sports gambling.
Brian, who's behind this in the House, and are there any allies in the Senate that might be able to convince Berger? I mean, I don't think anybody can convince Berger. The Lord Almighty might not be able to convince Phil Berger of anything. But do you think there could be enough of a groundswell that maybe the Senate would at least take it up?
Yeah, it's possible. Keith Kidwell, Aaron Paré. Aaron Paré represents Wake County. Keith Kidwell represents coastal counties.
Yep. Down this way.
They're not exactly aligned necessarily. They're both Republicans, but I would say Paré is much more moderate than Kidwell, and they're both in favor of this bill. So there is support. I think they're hearing from constituents who are confused about the bill. Like, well, do I really have to claim this? Wait a second, I didn't even make money. Why do I have to pay taxes on this? I think they've heard from people. I don't know if the Senate would be inclined to go along with it. Usually some legislatures just sort of pass all these tax conforming changes in one big bill. Anytime the IRS changes something, they'll change the state law to kind of conform with it. But that hasn't happened here, and I guess it's been like that for more than a decade. So this difference has existed for more than a decade, and I don't know that sports gambling is going to be enough to get it changed.
We'll see. It took sports gambling kind of a second crack. Now, there's no Jason Sane in there to shepherd this thing along. At least, internally there's not. But we will see what happens. Maybe it's a post July 4th or next go-around thing. We'll see what happens. The great Brian Murphy from WRAL Sports Investigative Reporter joining us here. Where is the revenue distribution legislation right now as it pertains to going to places like East Carolina, Charlotte, App, and then also NC State and North Carolina being involved in that?
Yeah, not to get too political here, but there is a huge budget fight happening between the House, which has passed their budget, and the Senate, which has passed their budget. Both budgets include money for North Carolina, the University of North Carolina, and NC State. And they would change the distribution formula a little bit. The Senate would raise the tax level on the sports betting operators to generate even more revenue. So they both want to include UNC and NC State in that category. Currently, the other 13 schools that have athletic departments already get money. I just saw that they've already gotten more than $2 million since gambling started. The athletic departments at East Carolina, App State, all the way down to Elizabeth City State University and Pembroke. They've all gotten over $2 million, which for some of those athletic departments, meets their yearly obligations in some ways. So now they want to include UNC and NC State because the sports gambling revenue is way over what they projected. They have vast differences in who would get what. The Senate would be much more generous to NC State and to UNC. The House bill would put them on par with the other FBS schools, East Carolina, Charlotte, and App State. However, this budget fight means that those changes aren't going to take place until there's an overall budget. I don't think it's a big enough issue to be run as a standalone bill. So until there's a budget agreement between the House and the Senate, which are both controlled by Republicans, until they reach an agreement, there's not going to be any change to the tax rate, to the distribution, or to the inclusion of UNC and NC State. And that money is super important, right? Because of the House settlement and the fact that they've got to now share up to $20.5 million of revenue with their athletes.
So, again, not to get in the weeds politically, but all indications are that it doesn't look like there's going to be an agreement between the House and the Senate on a budget package. Does that get pushed back post July 4th? And if so, how long?
Yeah, I mean, they are going to get out of here this week or maybe early next week before the July 4th holiday, and may not be back in all of August. So we're talking about this wouldn't be resolved until September, October, November. I mean, unlike the federal government, which, the government shuts down if there's not a budget, North Carolina, that doesn't happen. You just continue with the same budget that you've had for the previous year. So the same distribution of all that gambling tax money, the same tax rate, all that would stay in place. But UNC and NC State would not get any of that money, and everybody else would get the same percentage they've been getting. Both chambers want to up that a little bit, but so there's less demand on them to go ahead and get a resolution because all the state services will still be going on. So issues like this will just happen to get caught up in a budget fight, every year.
We invoke the name of Jason Sane, who we've had on the show in recent weeks, and he has essentially said it makes no sense to raise taxes on the gambling revenues. You've talked to a lot of people. There's obviously lawmakers who want to do that. Is there a legitimate concern that there would be, I don't know, maybe less participation if the tax on the on the different companies was raised? It seemed like a little bit of a flimsy argument from Sane's standpoint.
Yeah, it's important to note that this payment would not be made by the people who gamble on the games. This would be paid by FanDuel and DraftKings and BetMGM and the companies that are the operators. Right.
Yeah, the operators. Yes.
What we have seen in some other states is that when the tax rate gets too high, and other states have elevated the tax rate in part because, look, nobody wants to raise taxes on citizens. It's a lot easier to raise taxes on a gambling company. It's kind of an easy win for lawmakers, when everybody's searching for more revenue. So this has happened in other states, and in some states, including Illinois, where it's gotten over 40%. The FanDuel and DraftKings in particular have started charging like sort of surcharges on bettors, and so they are seeing it in the terms of worse odds. Basically, you're getting worse odds on the bets that you place because the taxes are higher and they're trying to make up that money somehow. So, it doesn't have a direct impact on sports bettors, but it may have an indirect impact if they feel like they have to change the odds, give you worse odds on the bets that you're placing in order to make that money and pay the higher tax. Currently, the tax in North Carolina is 18%. The Senate bill would increase that, would double it to 36%. The House version is still at 18%. Do they reach some sort of compromise where it gets into the 20s, 25% or something like that? That's always possible. Again, they have much bigger issues to deal with in this budget. So, it's easy. It's an easy place to go find more revenue. Hey, these gambling companies are doing way better than they ever expected in North Carolina. Let's try to take some more of their money. But in the House, at least, they are opposed to that.
There, if I'm not mistaken, when all this was passed, there were also the designation that there would be some brick and mortar places you could go and place action, a sports book, if you will. Where is that right now in all of this?
No one's actually applied to have an in-person sports book. I believe in Raleigh there may be one soon. Soon is a relative term. There may be one when the Hurricanes finish their development around Lenovo Center. They definitely want to put in some kind of sports book, but I think that's going to be kiosks. I don't think it's going to be like cages like you see in Las Vegas if you've been out there. I think we're going to see kiosks. And I mean, one of the points I made in my reporting, and I think lawmakers, I'm not sure they totally understood this. You've got your phone. You've got a sports book in your pocket. Why would you need to go somewhere and place bets? Now it could be a good restaurant. It could be a nice bar. It could have lots and lots of TVs for you to watch the action. And I get, putting some kiosks in there. But most people have accounts on their phone. They're not going to want to sign up at a kiosk or not get the credits that they want by going to a person and giving them cash. So there has not been a high demand in the state for that brick and mortar type place. And I do think that the Hurricanes will put one on their new development, but I don't think it's going to be a traditional sports book that we think of. I think it'll be a nice restaurant, a nice sports bar with a couple of kiosks where you can you can place bets if you just want to throw down. You don't want to open an account. You're just going to the game. You want to throw $20 on the Hurricanes to win.
Brian Murphy with us, sports investigative reporter for WRAL, back on the Patrick Johnson Show. Wanted to ask you a little bit about something you reported this week, and others, of course, have reported too, where North Carolina has committed to rev share to the tune of in excess of $20 million. There's obviously more opportunity there to generate, and has been a lot of opportunity there to generate money in Chapel Hill from various things. So that allows them to kind of max out on this. You know what the distribution percentage is? Football, basketball, and I guess the other two sports.
Yeah, UNC announced they're only going to rev share with 4 sports. Football, basketball, women's basketball. That's what every school that has announced their plan has included those 3 schools. And then North Carolina added baseball as their 4th sport. Most of the schools plan to follow the House settlement. So the House settlement is paying $2.7 billion in back pay to former athletes. Football is getting about 75% of that, men's basketball 15%, women's basketball 5%, and other sports 5%. At UNC, they have not released the exact breakdown, but if you look at Bill Belichick's term sheet when he signed on to become UNC's head coach in December, it said that revenue sharing would be $13 million. That's about 65%, a little slightly less than 65% of the total. And so it looks like Carolina is going to shift a little bit of the money from football, presumably to men's basketball. And so they would get a little bit more than the 15%. So that's where it stands. We don't have firm numbers, but that number in the Belichick contract, the $13 million in rev share, at least gives us a starting point. There's been a lot of questions to me about women's soccer wins, a national championship every year, and field hockey and women's lacrosse have all won national titles at Carolina in the last couple of years.
Right.
Carolina is giving out 200 additional scholarships, which is allowed under the House settlement. And so their hope, I think, is that, there's not going to be a lot of schools that rev share with women's soccer. And so by adding scholarships, by taking care of those athletes, by having the tradition that they have, I think the hope is that helps those programs survive and continue to thrive without necessarily having to give them any of the revenue sharing.
What about NC State? Have they said anything? Have you heard any murmurs as to what they're going to do in Raleigh?
Yeah, NC State, the $20.5 million is the cap, and it goes up 4% every year. You said you're going to have John Gilbert on tomorrow at East Carolina. I don't think they're going to get to that cap right away. NC State, in some budget documents indicated they might be at about $16.5 million. Now I find it hard to believe that they won't find a way to get to the 20.5, but they have not announced which sports they're sharing with, and they have not announced their total cap for revenue sharing. But in some budget documents that I saw, with the presumption that the House settlement would be finalized, which it was, they had about a $16.5 million difference between their non-House budget and their House budget. And so they may have to find, additional dollars to compete with the other schools in the ACC, which I think will be almost all of them will get to that $20.5 million. But they have not divided out. I imagine they will, like everybody else, give to football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and then probably baseball as well. But we'll see if they include any other sports in that.
You had the occasion during the height of all the Jordan Hudson mania to interview Bill Belichick. I believe it was in Florida. I think that's where it was. You got maybe a couple minute interview with him. You didn't get a really lengthy amount of time. I don't know if any parameters were put on that other than just time. But kind of take us back to that. And you guys did cover as much as I think you felt like you could cover, given the amount of time you were allotted with him.
Yeah, WRL and myself and a cameraman and another reporter actually attended the ACC spring meetings in Florida. This is where football coaches, basketball coaches, women's basketball coaches, ADs, kind of the whole conference kind of gets together. And obviously the Belichick story is the big one for us here at WRL. And didn't think that I would get time with Belichick. Thought maybe we could talk to him passing in the hallways, but ended up us and the News and Observer as well. Got about 5 minutes with him. Did not want to answer questions about Jordan Hudson during that time. But other than that, we were able to ask him, kind of whatever we wanted. And obviously, it was a short period of time. He's been on a big media blitz since then, doing Good Morning America and ESPN and others. actually held a press conference here in Chapel Hill a couple weeks ago as well. But yeah, down in Florida, got the chance to talk to him, and got the sense that it's such a strange story, the Jordan Hudson story, but to talk to him and get a sense of how invested he is in the program. And we had a good conversation on camera, and then we talked a little bit off camera, but he was, in the weeds on stuff like the roster limits and the house settlement and how you deal with walk-on players who may not have a spot. I mean, he, we'll see how good the season is, but he was very invested in the program and the nuances of college football. And talking to other coaches, they said Belichick asked a lot of good questions in those meetings about, why do you guys do things this way in college football? Or have you thought about doing things this way? And obviously brings a wealth of knowledge about the sport to these meetings. Obviously, most of his experiences in pro football.
I say this jokingly, half jokingly, but Hudson wasn't off camera, was she, when you did your interview?
She was not. And she has been – she's been a little scarcer, I think, at these meetings. Carolina hired a Belichick-specific PR person, and he has been handling most of these media obligations as the publicist, quote-unquote, in the room.
You worked, Brian Murphy, sports investigative reporter for WRAL with us. You worked at one time in Idaho. You might be from Idaho. I don't remember. So you know a little bit about Boise State. They are now in the Pac-12 or be heading to the Pac-12. That media deal was announced. There's been a lot of discussion about, Memphis, Tulane, even at one point South Florida, but I don't think the Pac-12 could really help a whole lot with what the American exit money would entail. And look, no team in the American has 20, 25 million laying around to do this, even Memphis with the FedEx money and the late Fred Smith's money, I'm sure, couldn't even really do it comfortably. What do you make of that deal with CBS? And, just as someone who's maybe familiar with the landscape, but also familiar with the Boise landscape, how do you see all that kind of playing out?
Yeah, I moved here when I was like 10, so I grew up in North Carolina, but I worked in Boise for a decade during the Chris Peterson era, the heyday of Boise State. They won 3 Fiesta Bowls while I was covering the team. They've wanted to get to the Pac-12 so bad for so long that I'm not sure this is the kind of Pac-12 they wanted to join, but that's another story. I mean, I think that the television deal with CBS is basically a replacement for the Mountain West deal. Like, they're only guaranteed 3 football games, 3 men's basketball games on big CBS during the course of a season. I don't think that's going to be super appealing to the Memphises of the American Athletic Conference. Right. I mean, further, it looks like their money, while doubling what they were getting in the Mountain West, may fall below $10 million. And the reporting I've seen says Memphis and other schools are getting above that already. I'll be interested to see what other television deals they sign, but yeah, $27 million to get out of the American Athletic Conference. I don't think that the Pac-12 TV deal is good enough to entice anybody. The bigger question is, can they get UNLV? Can they get UNLV to leave the Mountain West and join them? Can they get Texas State? But I think the opportunity where there was all that talk that they were going to, kneecap the American Athletic Conference, I think those days are past. And I should be asking you, right? There's been some talk about East Carolina possibly going to the Sun Belt, which again, ridiculous. From a financial standpoint, doesn't seem to make a ton of sense, even if it makes maybe geographic sense and rivalry sense. These decisions are driven by money. They've always been driven by money, and they'll continue to be driven by money. And no team is going to take a step back in the amount of revenue that they get from television on purpose. They're not going to do it willingly.
Yeah, you can't do that. You can't make. I mean, that'd be malpractice. You bring up UNLV. I almost forgot about that. Why hasn't the UNLV thing happened? I mean, there's a little bit of a brand there. I mean, for guys our age, you hear UNLV, you kind of, oh yeah, UNLV. I remember, Tark the Shark and some of those great basketball teams, and then it's in a desirable market, a growing market, regardless of what you think of what goes on in Vegas. It's become more of an entertainment capital now than anything, and it's growing by leaps and bounds.
Yeah, the Pac-12 did not include UNLV in their first sort of foray, the first teams that went over, but they went after them hard in their kind of second round of trying to get schools. UNLV's athletic department faces a huge budget shortfall, and what the Mountain West did was say all these fees that we're getting from all these schools that are leaving, UNLV and Air Force you're going to get the lion's share of it. I think they're each getting over 25% of all those fees, because the Mountain West realized that without Air Force and UNLV, they didn't have a conference anymore. And so, other schools like New Mexico or Nevada are getting far less a percentage of those fees that are supposed to be paid by the Pac-12 schools. And we may be getting too far in the weeds, but the Pac-12 schools and the Pac-12 has sued, saying those fees are exorbitant. They shouldn't have to pay that much. And if they are the win in that mediation, or they're the win in that court case, then that money dries up that the Mountain West was going to use to keep UNLV happy, to keep Air Force happy. We could see, if the money's not there, we could see those schools then begin talking about leaving to go to the Pac-12, or in Air Force's case, maybe the American, to join, Army and Navy. So one story to keep an eye on is what happens with those fees that the Pac-12 schools are supposed to pay for leaving. And if those fees get reduced down to a level where the Mountain West doesn't have the money, you could see another round of movement out west.
Last thing, two more things for you here. Appreciate the time as always. I know you're busy. Do you see this? Excuse me. Do you see this group that is going to be in charge of policing or monitoring NIL? I mean, how do you see that at the end of the day kind of going? I mean, it's the NCAA just so neutered. It's nothing more than a rubber stamping agency.
Yeah, the NCAA is going to run the championships, and this College Sports Commission is in charge of sort of enforcing the House settlement. This NIL Go, where athletes are going to have to put their NIL deals over $600 through this clearinghouse, I think is going to open the door, if they start getting rejected. I think is going to open the door for litigation. I mean, this is how all this stuff gets settled, through the legal channels. But if they start saying no, this player can accept this deal, but this player can't accept that deal, then I think we're going to be headed right back to court. And so that's one of the things I'm looking out for. How lenient are they? How strict are they with the deals that get approved? And then secondly, the College Sports Commission, the whole apparatus of the House settlement was to kind of wean out the collectives, get them out, put everybody on more of a level playing field. These collectives have been around for a couple of years. I don't think they're going to go willingly into the night. So I do wonder, if we're going to see schools find creative ways for their collectives to still be involved in this, to create third-party NIL deals, or to fund some aspect of some of these programs, and so that they don't really go away. They just get redirected in a different manner. But, nobody's really been able to control this issue since it started. The NCAA obviously has been neutered in many ways, largely through the legal system. I don't know that the College Sports Commission is going to be all that different.
What will be, just kind of based on what we have talked about here, what will be the big story over the next month before we start getting into, college football media days and off-season camps for the NFL and all of this stuff? What will be the kind of the big discussion point, kind of centering around just everything we've talked about here in your mind, or maybe something we haven't talked about?
Yeah, no, I think the implementation of House and how schools do handle this revenue sharing, how they generate the revenue, quite frankly. I mean, both NC State and UNC have said they're going to sell the naming rights to their football stadiums. We may see jersey patches like in the NBA and Major League Baseball. We may see there's a mad scramble for revenue from every school in the NCAA, from the smallest school to the biggest school. And there's going to be, North Carolina thinks they're going to have to raise an additional $30 million by the time next year rolls around. They're going to sell anything and everything that they can. And I think we're going to see a lot of deals be made for naming rights, for sponsorships, for jersey patches, for logos. Can you get on the headset? If they're going to show Bill Belichick 35 times a game, is there value in getting your logo on the headset that he's wearing? I mean, I think we're going to see the professionalization of college sports just become, melded more and more together.
Crazy. Hey, Brave New World. Thank you, Brian, very much. Appreciate it. Enjoy your summer.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, it's great to have Brian Murphy, sports investigative reporter for WRAL and WRAL.com. All right, let's go to Philip the Ref Pilkington with the 94.3 The Game Sports Update and Pirate Report.
Thank you, P-Man. Starting in Pirate Athletics, the baseball team has landed a transfer infielder from a conference foe. Carlos Jacalma comes over from the Bulls of South Florida. He hit .309 last season and had an .872 OPS, which was third on the team. Baseball America has announced that Coastal Carolina manager Kevin Schnall has been named their Coach of the Year. Schnall obviously led the Chanticleers all the way to the College World Series final. The NBA draft begins tonight just after 8 o'clock. Let's be honest, it'll probably be closer to 8:30. The Mavs will be on the clock. Cooper Flagg is expected to be the number one overall pick with odds of minus 20,000. So probably not something you're going to want to wager on there. That'll do it for your 94.3 The Game Sports Flash Update and Pirate Report. We're going to take a timeout here on the Patrick Johnson Show and be back to wrap it up right after this.
And now, the stunning conclusion.
Why is everyone screaming?
On 94.3 The Game.
All right, welcome back. Thanks to Brian Murphy for being with us. Good stuff to have him on the program. So I'm seeing Trey Johnson, the guard out of Texas, going to Charlotte in some projections I'm seeing. You've seen Con Knipple. What are you? I know you've spent a little time looking at this, Pilk. What do you have based on what I guess the Action Network is saying? And the Action Network, by the way, doesn't set its own odds.
No.
They were kind of report. They're
So
like an aggregator
average.
of the. Yeah, they aggregate and average all the odds, and that's where they come up with. But kind of go through that methodology, and what are you hearing out of Charlotte that you've researched here in the last little bit?
Yeah, so I'm seeing that they are very high on Dylan Harper going 2, VJ Edgecombe going 3, and then following that with Con Knipple going 4. He's the last player that is minus money to go to a specific team. So now there's still a huge fall off from VJ Edgecombe to Con Knipple. They've got him only at minus 185. So this is not anything they're saying is going to be a slam dunk by any means. Obviously, the first pick I think is the only thing that's 100% guaranteed. But that's where they're leaning. Now, I think it kind of comes down to what Charlotte wants and what they feel like they need and who they feel like they can pair better in the backcourt with LaMelo Ball, and whether or not, Con's going to be a little bit more of a wing, more of a perimeter guy, or do they want to do a true backcourt 1-2 tandem with the kid out of Texas and LaMelo Ball? So that's kind of the tough thing, and obviously we haven't talked to anybody on the inside, so I'm not really 100% sure. I read some stuff, but it didn't really seem like Charlotte was leaning any one particular way, at least to the public. And so that's kind of makes this fourth pick really intriguing. Excuse me.
Maluak is being forecast to be a top 10 guy out of Toronto. Seems like a possibility there. I'm just kind of going through this list of people that. And this is really just kind of assigning where they think they'll fall, not necessarily related to the team per se. Drake Powell, it's got him in this, but more of a second round guy. I think Sion James, who played at Tulane's probably a second round guy. Proctor's probably a second round guy.
About it.
Yeah,
local guys.
That's about it. Yeah, that's really
State
about
didn't
it.
make the ACC tournament. You think they're going to have anybody getting drafted?
No,
probably not.
But I mean, and again, you don't know. It's what happens with the influx or whatever of foreign players. What foreign players would get drafted and how that changes things. Certainly, I think the Cooper Flagg thing, and it will be a Cooper Flagg show tonight. As it should be. The NBA needs kind of a new generation of stars, and Flagg could certainly be one of them.
He could. The interesting thing is going to be he's definitely, the last couple of years, the number one pick hasn't been as hyped up. You came off back-to-back years of Wemby and Chet, and now it seems like Cooper might even be a bigger number one pick than those guys. Not saying he's going to go out there and he's going to be better, but it's just the fact that he went to Duke. And Duke is a national brand. I know a lot of people hate Duke, but look, you either love Duke or you love to hate Duke, right?
They're the Yankees and Cowboys of college basketball. They are.
Yeah. When Duke plays, you watch. You might watch with, rooting interest in just whoever they're playing.
Or you might be a hater.
Yeah. So, that's kind of one of those things. I think that's why he was put more in the public eye. But really, is he going to be any better than those guys? We don't know. I think but the NBA needs probably 2 out of the 3 of those guys to really hit. And the unfortunate thing, it seems like with Chet's not even the best player on his own team right now.
Right.
And we know it's SGA, and then there's a question, is Chet the second best player on his own team? Well, maybe he's not that either. So, Cooper can be that guy. There's been a lot of talk about his, I remember they were down the stretch about whether his parents are kind of jerks. I mean, they're not. That was some big deal the Carolina fans were making out of. But let's hope, for the NBA's sake, that continues to be a thing. Let's hope they continue to go to games, and maybe the Spurs fans start hating his parents or something, because that's what the NBA needs right now. That's what they can run with marketing. Like you said, he's no Caitlin Clark. There won't be another team sport athlete ever like Caitlin Clark. The only people that are even comparable to her are individual sports athletes. You think of Michael Phelps and Tiger Woods and Serena Williams, but he's not going to be that. But if he can be the next Curry, obviously a different style player, but that'll be good for the league, because Curry's not what Curry used to be, and heck, nobody likes LeBron anymore.
They don't. By the way, my main man Fitzpatrick J at Duke basketball camp the rest of the week was there last year.
Yeah,
when J.J. Redick was. Shire spoke to him this morning.
Nice
is what I was told by Coach in the group text, that Shire spoke to the campers this morning. And I'm sure got on a private jet and is on his way.
Where is the draft in New York? I don't even know where the heck it is.
I want to say it is not.
I think they've kind of done what the National Football League does, and they bounce it around. But I don't know if they're as centric in saying, like, this team's hosting it,
That's in Brooklyn. So, I mean, it's technically not in New York.
That's right.
Yes,
they've only moved it over
at the Barclays.
What do they want the players to get mugged when they walk out of the door? You can't leave this thing in Manhattan at like Radio City or something.
Bunch of hipsters there, Bill.
Manhattan
bunch of
is way more
in
safe
Barclays.
than Brooklyn. Yeah.
Did you see what the city of New York did for its mayoral candidate?
Yeah.
Whew. Man.
That guy's
Get ready for an influx.
Yeah, that dude's
Get ready for an influx.
Socialist. I'm telling you, most Democrats don't agree with that guy.
Get ready for an influx down south. All right. So, thanks to Brian Murphy. Thanks to you, Pilk. We'll be back tomorrow with John Gilbert in studio, and then we'll talk to Mike Swartz on Friday.